Support for Elwood City Limits is brought to you by Facebook,
Facebook.com/Elwood City Limits,
Twitter,
@ECL Podcast,
Tumblr,
ElwoodCityLimits.tumblr.com,
and Gmail.
ElwoodCityLimits@gmail.com.
And from listeners like you. Thank you.
And my free time.
Got to get that in there.
It's a beautiful day in this neighborhood, a beautiful day for a neighbor. Would you be mine? Could you be mine? It's a neighborly day in this beauty wood, a neighborly day for beauty. Would you be mine? Could you be mine? I have always wanted to have a neighbor just like you. I've always wanted to live in a neighborhood with you. So let's make the most of this beautiful day. Since we're together, we might as well say, would you be mine? Could you be mine? Won't you be my neighbor? Won't you please? Won't you please? Please won't you be my neighbor? My neighbor? I'm glad we're together again.
Well, good God. It's the changing of the seasons. From season 1 to season 2. Here on Elwood City Limits, the episodic Arthur podcast. Thank you for joining us, and maybe you are jumping on for the first time. Decided to skip right past Arthur season 1. You got this Arthur thing on lock, so you're joining us here.
Oh, you're going to miss
2.
all the spoilers.
That's right. As a matter of fact, Arthur Season 2 directly links back to Season 1 in many interesting ways, both in the show and our podcast. But welcome either way, no matter if this is your first or your latest. My name is Will Young, the host of the show, and with me is my co-host, Lucas Mancini.
Hello, hello.
No holidays to greet anybody for this week. Or, well, actually, I guess we could say, may the 4th be with you.
Yikes. What do they say? Live long and prosper, right? That's what the kids say?
Yeah. Doctor Who.
What does God need with a spaceship?
Excuse me. What does God need with a starship?
Yeah, my favorite Star Wars line.
That's right.
Actually, you know what? I think my favorite Star Wars movie is when he goes, "Now I know what a TV dinner feels like." That's
right.
Probably my favorite Star Wars quote.
My favorite Star Wars weapon is the sonic screwdriver.
Oh, yeah?
I'm a big fan.
Yeah?
Big fan. But you can't use it on terry cloth. That's the rule.
Okay.
So before we get into the first episode of Season 2, we got us an email this week, which was, of course, sent to us at elwoodcitylimits@gmail.com. The subject is, thank you for Elwood City Limits, plus Charizard card story. This one is from Anna. 2 things I wanted to tell you. First of all, I've been dealing with severe depression for the last couple of months. I'm sorry. And your podcast has really helped me through it because I made it a rule for myself that I can't listen to new episodes of your wonderful podcast unless I listen to it while walking outside, which forces me to actually roll out of bed and get out of my house. It's really been helpful, so thank you for that. Well, you're the real hero here. You're the real MVP for getting yourself up out of bed with severe depression, but I guess we're happy to help in any way we can, and I really hope that you're able to get some help, Anna. We're rooting for you.
I'm happy to hear that she's, that we've helped in any way. That's actually pretty amazing.
Yeah, it is.
So
thank you.
I'm glad to hear it sounds like she's doing better. So
I certainly hope
that's nice to hear.
We certainly hope so. The other thing I want to tell you was this. I was in 5th grade during the height of the Pokemon card craze, and it's so true about teachers banning stuff like that. But what made me really laugh was Lucas's reference to the rumor about that kid who had a knife pulled on him for the holographic Charizard card, because that was a prevalent rumor where I was growing up in Denver.
I don't even remember saying this.
I think you brought it up, and then I just kind of threw in like, oh, it must have been for the holographic Charizard,
right.
Which would have been silly because that came in the Pokemon starter pack. You could just get your mom could get that for you, easy peasy.
Yeah, but it was shiny though, Will.
But they all were shiny. Actually, I lost my holographic Charizard card in my backpack somewhere. I was devastated.
Well, there you go. Lost or pickpocketed by a knife-wielding criminal. Who knows?
And then I just had a shiny.
Not me.
And then I just had a shiny Machamp, and I didn't have.
I got the shiny Machamp as well.
But I didn't have the Machoke, so I couldn't evolve him in actual play. You know, I don't think I've ever actually played a game of that.
I was just gonna say, whoosh, that's over my head. I as many Pokemon cards as I had, I also did not really know the rules of the Pokemon trading card game. I played the Game Boy adaptation, Pokemon the trading card game, game. And that one's good because it does all the math for you.
Yes, that game is great. It's just basically Pokemon just played with the trading cards, and it's great. I have that at my house with a Game Boy Color. It's and the best part of that game is the music. The music.
Oh yeah, I don't remember it.
The music is fantastic. Thank you for bringing that up because I was absolutely going to. Pokemon the card game's really complicated. It's like you need to have so many energies on your Pokemon in order to attack, whereas like
there's this concept of the bench, which doesn't exist in like Pokemon the show or Pokemon the games. Or like concept of benching Pokemon,
or like any other card games. Really, there's like
a lot
of the ones for kids were really complicated. Then you got to Yu-Gi-Oh, and it was nice and streamlined, so you could get deeper into the rules.
Oh yeah, those deep Yu-Gi-Oh rules.
Oh dude, they're deeper than you might think. It's not the King's game that is Magic the Gathering.
That's correct. A real adult hobby such as Magic the Gathering, a real that's a game for grown-ups, Will. I don't know if you know that or not.
I like how you're talking down to people voices, your Mauro Ronaldo voice. A real King's game.
Oh my goodness.
Anyways, let's get back to this. Anna says, I am now 27 years old and live in Connecticut. And just last week, a friend of mine who grew up in Connecticut mentioned the exact same rumor. I just thought it was funny that the rumor seemed to have spread across the country and into Canada. I wonder if it even spread across the world. Anyway, I love your podcast. It makes me feel good and nostalgic. Best, Anna. Anna, thank you very much for your email. Connecticut, I drove by it on the way to Philadelphia, and I saw the WWE headquarters from the highway.
Oh, yeah?
That was pretty cool.
The only things I know about Connecticut are that's where the WWE headquarters are, and that's where they film Maury now. When I went to New York, I was all excited. Me and my dad were going to get tickets to go watch Maury, but they film it in Connecticut as opposed to New York City. They used to film it in New York.
I see. And that's where Triple H is from. All right, so now it's time to get into our first episode of Arthur Season 2. Now, the good thing that I noticed is that there's not a whole lot of change over from Arthur Season 1 to Season 2.
It's not like The Wire. They didn't get like
Tom Waits to do the
opening. Wait, just
when you walk through the garden.
Yeah, but I'm trying to think of like how he would sing the Arthur theme. It'd be like
you gotta listen to your heart.
Yeah, that was a little bit.
Listen to the beat. Listen to the rhythm. Rhythm of the street.
Your Tom Waits singing the Arthur theme is a little too close to the guy that sings The Touch, but I applaud you for trying.
You gotta listen to your heart.
Oh my goodness.
And I mean, Tom Waits is hard enough to imitate because his voice just changes all the time. But no, same regular schmegular opening. But it's a little bit more star power here in the first story because it is indeed Arthur meets Mr. Rogers. Let's start off with the cold open, and we get an immediate callback to episode 1 of Elwood City Limits, Arthur's vampire coat.
Oh yeah, I was like, oh yeah, that's that coat I haven't seen in forever. I didn't know that dates back to our first episode.
Mm-hmm. That's one of the first things we talked about was when Arthur was trying to hide the fact that he has glasses, he wore that vampire coat
big
over.
Old popped collar.
Yeah, so it's back. It's kind of like his. He just must have grabbed a coat in a hurry because he's running off to the Sugar Bowl.
The first time, did we mention that he looks like he's dressed like he's in a Bloodborne game?
Yes, we did.
Okay, good.
We absolutely did. It looks like the coat you start with in Bloodborne. And Arthur is running through the Hunter's Dream, trying to get to the Sugar Bowl to tell his friends he's breathless because he wants to tell everybody that Mr. Rogers is going to be at their school tomorrow. He says he has two things. So the first thing is Mr. Rogers is going to be at their school tomorrow. Buster is impressed, but immediately Muffy and Prunella are not as impressed. In fact, Muffy even says, Mr. Rogers, do they think we're babies? Like getting right down to the baby talk. That's some serious words. And then, if that isn't bad enough, then Binky says, "Oh, I adore Mr. Rogers. It's a beautiful day in the neighborhood." Like really dunking on that theme.
It's the closest we've ever gotten to Binky actually bullying anybody. Like Binky's
Mr. Rogers?
Well, not Mr. Rogers, but just like I guess the concept of Mr. Rogers. Like Binky actually hasn't looked down on anyone yet.
Well, he's physically threatened people.
That's I
bullying.
guess, but it's like all been super empty. This is the first time Binky's like made fun of anything, I feel like. And so it already rings super shallow, but it is funny. I got a kick out of him and doing his little dance.
Just doing this namby-pamby impression of the Mr. Rogers theme.
What did kids think of Mr. Rogers when you were a kid, Will?
Let me just finish here with the cold opening. That I have a little bit more on Mr. Rogers. And then Arthur's second thing he decides not to tell them. The second thing is that Mr. Rogers is staying at his house, which he becomes very, very anxious about, and which becomes the holdover for the episode. So Mr. Rogers, of course, I just want to give a quick recap because we have some younger listeners here who may not have been had Mr. Rogers in their life as young children, as you and I had the opportunity to. So Mr. Rogers is Fred Rogers. He was a TV personality and educator, and he was behind the show Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, which aired on public television, PBS, for 33 years.
It's called Synergy. Look it up.
It's 33 years on the air from 1968 all the way to 2001. Fred Rogers, he was given the Presidential Medal of Freedom for his work there in terms of child
the Imagination Land Wars?
Yeah, child education. What the hell are you talking about?
Like, he got the Medal of Honor for, defending Imagination Land from invaders.
Oh, right, that thing. He has over 40 honorary degrees and a Peabody Award. You may tangentially know him because, and I found out about this today, there's a PBS Kids show on right now called Daniel Tiger's Neighborhood.
Okay.
And that is actually a spin-off of Mr. Rogers.
Oh, my goodness. He's like Mr. Rogers is Robin or something. Like he took up the Mr. Rogers mantle.
Oh, yeah. So Daniel Tiger in this case would be the Tim Drake of the Mr. Rogers Neighborhood.
I was trying to remember Robin's name.
Yeah. And Daniel Tiger was one of Mr. Rogers' puppets. And then so now has his own CGI show. And I didn't put that together because it's been forever since I've watched Mr. Rogers.
Yeah, same here. I actually, as I'm sure you did, after watching this Arthur episode, I looked up some YouTube clips. I was like, oh yeah, I want to remember what the production value and like what did the Mr. Rogers show look like? What was its format and stuff? So that was actually really interesting looking back upon.
It was very bare bones as compared to some other things, but keep in mind that this started before Sesame Street, and it was very straightforward at the time where you could have just a gentleman on a kids show just kind of very directly educating you about anything from scientific concepts to feelings to like anything that would be of use for kids.
I also think there's a whole generation of people, like significantly younger than us, who might remember Mr. Rogers more as a punchline.
Yeah.
Things like The Ultimate Showdown. I think that Mr. Rogers jokes were very in vogue at that point in those early Newgrounds days.
Well, it was transgressive. It was like when you would see all of those awful Flash cartoons of like, oh, you get to kill Barney, or let's beat up the Teletubbies. It's just like,
well, compared to those, I think the Ultimate Showdown actually does it more if you want to call it that, tastefully.
Yeah, and even then, the Ultimate Showdown is it's pretty old. We're pretty old for knowing what that is.
Yeah, for sure.
Kids today may not know. And Fred Rogers passed away in 2003 at the age of 74. But he has quite the legacy. Now, Lucas, you asked earlier what kids thought of Mr. Rogers. I think it was just that Mr. Rogers was something that pretty much every kid that was allowed to watch TV watched when they were much younger. So I don't have great memories of watching it because I think I was between the ages of 3 and 6 when I watched it. I would have been very, very young when it was on TV, but it's early enough that when you hear like just the opening piano of the Mr. Rogers intro, you're just like
the shot of the train coming in into Imagination Land,
and you're just like, oh, like just a very wistful kind of oh, and then when you grow up, I mean, you kind of get out of that, and that has to do with kids at one point, and this is a big thing about Arthur, is that they don't want to be babies anymore. They don't want to be seen as little kids.
Oh my goodness.
They want to be seen more grown up. And the idea is that Mr. Rogers is, the sign of being a baby, because you kind of watch that. It's meant to appeal to kids who are very, very, very young. This is even below the Arthur kids. This would have been DW's age, as we get into in the episode. It's funny, as you get older, and I'd love to hear your perspective on this too, of just how you go from when you're younger being like, I don't like that Mr. Rogers stuff, to looking back and being like, man, Mr. Rogers was awesome. What about your experience?
I don't know. I think I'm a little bit younger than you, so I have very, very faint memories of actually watching Mr. Rogers. My memory of Mr. Rogers is more so it's more so memories of that sort of era of him being kind of like the joke, like, oh, Mr. Rogers and the bloodstained sweater and like all that like Ultimate Showdown stuff. Right. And like that's really where my memories of Mr. Rogers come from. Like, I remember the train coming in, I remember the prince, that kind of stuff, but it's all very vague. I don't have like as clear memories as I do as some other shows when I watched as a kid, like Arthur, or even earlier than that, Sesame Street for sure.
I imagine it's the kind of thing where if we don't have memories of it, our parents probably do.
Oh, for sure. Mr. Rogers, and very similarly a Canadian program, Mr. Dress Up,
yes,
is something that I remember my parents talking about all the time. The Friendly Green Giant, that's sort of their era of children's television.
Yeah,
Jolly Green Giant, excuse me.
Big Friendly Giant.
Big Friendly Giant.
Jolly Green Giant is on the peas.
He's on the peas can.
cans.
I always got them confused. In fact, as a kid, when my dad was telling me about the Jolly Giant, I think I was picturing the gentleman from the peas can.
And I mean those were things I watched on TV when I was little as well. But I mean, and in terms of Mr. Rogers, it's very possible that your parents, depending on how old they were, probably watched them when they were young too, which is kind of a theme of this episode as well. And I promise we're circling back around to this. And I just wanted to say one quick thing. In my mid-20s now, looking back on Mr. Rogers with kind of a fondness. And I think I really appreciate the role that he took on. He was a children's educator who worked on TV, and just all of the stories and like reading up on him, like you get the sense that there's no person seemingly as genuinely good-hearted and with the purest intentions that he does. And now, like looking back on those things of just like a Family Guy cutaway gag of just like, oh, here's Mr. Rogers peeping on this girl, and just like, man. You can do that to like the Teletubbies or Barney or something, and it's just like, yeah, it's kind of schmaltzy and kitty and all this kind of stuff, and just kind of not just like sounds and shapes basically. But Mr. Rogers really was trying something that I don't even think that public TV or any sort of TV is really doing these days. Really speaking to kids on almost an equal level and trying to educate them about some really complex stuff.
It's that the more genuine something is, the easier it is to make fun of.
Yeah.
So I think that's where that comes from.
I suppose so.
And there's few things as genuine as Mr. Rogers looking back. So
and I mean that's my own feeling about it. You may feel differently, but for me, it's just the least inventive or interesting thing is to make fun of Mr. Rogers. To me, I think the more interesting thing is to talk about just how much he did for generations of children and even parents, helping them to grow up. So there you go. There's a little bit of a primer on Mr. Rogers and a little bit of a soapbox for me. Let's get into the actual episode. So like we said, Mr. Rogers is the type of figure that really appeals more to little kids, and DW throughout this episode is just enamored with Mr. Rogers. Arthur's kind of trying to disassociate from him as much as possible, but DW is like, they go into the kitchen, she pulls out a chair for him, gets him like a cup of coffee, and like she loves Mr. Rogers.
So in this opening sequence, we kind of get the loose context of why Mr. Rogers is staying with the Reed family. And I found it surprisingly unclear. Like, they eventually explain it, but it's through ancillary conversations. It's not important to the plot of the story. It's just Mr. Rogers is staying with Arthur. But I was like, why is Mr. Rogers staying with them? Why is he in town? The first clue we get is that he's actually originally, in the Arthur canon, Mr. Rogers is originally from Elwood City.
That's right.
That's where he hails from.
Or at least, did they say whether or not Mom Reed grew up in Elwood City? Like, was she...
Yeah.
Okay.
So that's the other thing is they say Mr. Rogers is actually from Elwood City, and they say he knew Arthur's mom growing up, and so that's where the connection is, and that's why he's staying with them in town.
So Mr. Rogers, of course, in any sort of parody or just watching him, you'll notice that he has a very distinct way of speaking, and there's one line that he has that always stuck with me, and it's when DW is kind of helping him sit down and just like she asks him something, and he says, "That's right, DW." And it's like it almost sounds like somebody doing an imitation of George H.W. Bush. It's like, "That's right, DW."
Yeah, that very specific accent.
I wish I'd looked up where he's from because I could have helped to pinpoint the accent a little bit, but it's a very very distinct way of talking. So Mr. Rogers is only staying with them for another night while he's I think he's like visiting friends or something in the area, and throughout the episode, he's trying to figure out Arthur's acting a little antsy and, not himself, and Mr. Rogers is trying to talk to him, but Arthur's not into it. DW is asking him what's wrong, and initially Arthur says that he doesn't want to let people know that Mr. Rogers is at their house because he doesn't want people banging on the door asking for their autograph. And we get something here that we've never gotten before. It's Arthur's kind of fiddling with his glasses while he's saying this, and DW says, "You only fiddle with your glasses when you're telling a fib." So this is a brand new sort of tell for Arthur that when he fiddles with his glasses, that's when he's lying.
If you were Phoenix Wright Ace Attorney, that's what you'd watch out for. Props to Arthur, though. That's a good lie to come up with on the spot. I was like, okay, what excuse is he going to come up with this one? And then, hey, in 2017, TMZ would be trying to get a snap at old Mr. Rogers if he came to town.
Sure.
Hey, Mr. Rogers, what do you think about Paw Patrol? hey, it's Mr. We talked to Mr. Rogers at LAX. This is what he had to say. You know what I mean? It's a celebrity's world, and we're all living in it.
Mr. Rogers, what do you think about the new season of Daniel Tiger? What are you guys going to be talking about? Well, I think that it's going to be a very educational experience. Yeah, but what's going on behind the scenes there? What's going on?
Hey, Mr. Rogers, what do you think about Black China? She going to stay with Rob Kardashian or what? What's going on? I think Rob's got to get his priorities straight. I think he's got to figure out what's going on with himself before he worries about Black China and what's going on with her.
And your Mr. Rogers voice is just you at a bit of a higher register.
Yeah, it turns out that's a lot of my impressions, Will.
Of course, Arthur's real anxieties, he doesn't want his friends to find out that Mr. Rogers lives there, and then they'll make fun of him. There's an Arthur imagination cutaway where Mr. Rogers is walking down the street to mail some letters, and he's just, doing a riff on his own theme song of just like, "It's a beautiful day here at Arthur's house, a beautiful day here at Arthur's." And he passes by Muffy, Binky, and Prunella, and they see him, and they just like they point and laugh at him, and that's Arthur's worst fear. So Mr. Rogers wants to go mail some letters, but Arthur is just impresses upon him in no uncertain terms to stay there, and Arthur will do it for him, and just stay here, and leaves. He goes and he takes the Bloodborne coat with him again. Goes to the mailbox, runs into Prunella, and Arthur has to come up on the spot because he drops his postcards
Again, props to Art. Maybe Arthur's just better at lying than me, but I wouldn't have thought of this. Again, not as rock solid as his first excuse, I'll say that much, but it's creative.
But it's really a good sense of Arthur's improv skills. He really yes-ands this.
Oh, for sure.
Just like, she says, "These can't be from you. They're signed Fred." And he's like, "Oh, yeah, that's because I'm thinking of changing my name. Fred's just one of them. What do you think of some of the others? How about Casper? Junius?"
I never thought about that, but Arthur would be good at improv. He's like, "Give me a place. Okay, Chinese restaurant. All right, and I'm Fred in the Chinese restaurant. Okay, and I got a flat tire, and..."
Yeah, he's very good at the principle of yes and. We cut back to the Reed house. Mr. Rogers is kind of playing the Mr. Rogers theme on the piano, and Arthur, this is a great visual gag because Arthur is like zipping up his coat. He's kind of checking his wrists, like tying up his shoelaces, and he's doing it subconsciously as he's humming the theme, and then he just, "What am I doing?" Which is, of course, a parody of the way that Mr. Rogers would either come in and put in on his chucks, or he would get ready to go out and put on his coat while the theme song played. That was a very good reference. And I should say earlier in the episode, Arthur's mom, mentions that Arthur used to love Mr. Rogers when he was DW's age. So in another bid to make sure that Mr. Rogers doesn't go out, DW tries to get Arthur to play something for him on piano. Then Mr. Rogers says that he and DW are going to go for a walk around her neighborhood. And then Arthur's just like, I suddenly feel like playing.
That's almost exactly how he says it too.
So it cuts back to him finishing up a Beethoven routine, and Mr. Rogers very patiently watching, but DW is not. She is very, very unimpressed. Some great DW faces in this episode.
Great DW line too. She goes, Arthur, Mr. Rogers is gonna die of boredom.
That's right, and it's all in the delivery because Arthur's just like, let me see, did I play the Happy Boat 4 times? And then the line you said is like, she's just trying to get Mr. Rogers out the door, just like, Arthur, Mr. Rogers is going to die of boredom.
Very matter of fact.
Yeah, it's great. Mr. Rogers says, I promised DW that I would take her around the block, around her neighborhood. And then he says, but I get the feeling that you're embarrassed about something. And
right here, it was like looking in a mirror for me. Like, this is exactly how I react to these situations. Arthur sort of points to himself incredulously and is like, me? Me? No! Like, he's channeling Mark Wahlberg in The Happening when the lady's like,
what? No!
Yeah, you're trying to kill me, aren't you? What? No!
Planning on stealing something? No, ma'am, we're not. Plan on murdering me in my sleep? What? No. Yeah, my favorite thing is that he doesn't even deny it. He just goes, me? Hey. And then just changes the subject. So Arthur decides that he will allow them to go out, but he feels that Mr. Rogers needs a disguise. But then instead settles on a disguise for him and DW instead, so that they won't be implicated by being outside with them.
I loved this whole sequence. This almost came off as like an Adult Swim joke or something to me. Just the sheer ridiculousness of the visuals in this little part, I really got a kick out of. Because it's funny because Arthur's first idea is, well, Mr. Rogers, you got to have a disguise. Mm-hmm. Of course, Mr. Rogers is an adult in this situation, and what would he actually do in reality? He'd be like, no, I don't think so. That's kind of crazy.
Yeah.
So what they come up with, well, it certainly does the job.
So Arthur and DW put on fake beards that they just happen to have. And, it looks no more stranger than if Mr. Rogers was wearing a fake beard. They go to a park in Elwood City. There's a statue of another bearded fellow. And I was wondering, who do you think that statue's of? He's kind of in a bit of a sit-down pose, kind of thinking.
I think it's a riff on the Thinker.
Really? Because, I don't know, it just looks a little different, especially because, like, the statue appears to be clothed and bearded and stuff. It almost looks like a statue of a president.
It might just be generic park statue. The important part is that it also has a beard, so we could fit 3 beards in this scene.
Could be Jacob Katzenellenbogen, the founder of Elwood City, but that's not for a long time.
Oh my goodness, that's a deep Elwood City lore.
Yeah, I got it. And DW's just, Arthur, this beard is itchy, and she keeps sneezing. And then while they're in the park, Arthur's getting ready to do another lie. He's like really fumbling with his glasses. It's the kind of thing where, like, it's funny how you don't recognize your own tells when you're lying, but when you're seeing somebody else's, it looks super obvious. So it just must be Arthur's instinct. And then all of a sudden, Buster is helping his mother with groceries.
And the comedic timing on this, like. Also the framing, like Buster and his mom are in the distance.
Yeah.
Like they're in a car, and the way he delivers the line is like he's yelling from far away.
Look, Mom, it's Mr. Rogers!
Like he screams it from across the street.
Yeah, so you could hear it all the way in the grocery store parking lot. And then Arthur drags Mr. Rogers away. They're just basically running away from Buster at this point. Then they almost run into the tough customers playing some sidewalk soccer. And then they go into an alley. Arthur's just like, I want to show you something, Mr. Rogers. And then DW says, garbage? You wanted to show Mr. Rogers people's garbage? Just with all of these, just in this trashy alley. And then finally Buster catches up with them. And he is what we come to understand, he is a huge and unabashed Mr. Rogers fan.
He's so starstruck here, he forgets his own name.
Yeah. What's your name? I forget. And it's like, oh, brother. So Buster kind of tags along with them and Mr. Rogers, and Buster's and Arthur just impresses on him, like, listen, you can't tell anybody that Mr. Rogers is staying at my place. And he's like, hey, I got it, man. Hey, look, it's the Brain and Prunella. Where are you going? I'm gonna go tell them about Mr. Oh, right. Yeah, can't be trusted. And just like, wow, that was literally 10 seconds ago, Buster. Great job, dude. Like and that hasn't been like a thing where I don't think Buster's really blurted out secrets yet. He's been incredible. Has he?
He hasn't blurted out secrets. He's certainly blurted out things that have gotten Arthur in trouble from time to time.
That's true.
For instance, saying Arthur's the best babysitter, or Arthur is like. There's a lot of times where Buster really hyped up Arthur and got him into some hot water.
Buster's really terrible hype man, so it's not unbelievable to think that he's also really bad at keeping secrets. We go into the Brain's mom's ice cream shop with Brain, Prunella, and her sister Rubella.
Rubella continues to hold the spot on my list as my least favorite Arthur character.
Yeah.
It's sort of been a competition between a few characters. We've had Buster's mom sometimes. We've had Arthur's cousin. She was terrible. We've had Muffy. But in my heart, Rubella holds the top spot. I can't stand her. Something about her delivery and the combination of that with the mysticism, she drives me up the wall.
I mean, it's too bad. I wish we could get a bad character that was a male for once. It feels like we're ragging on a lot of the female characters that way.
Sure.
But it just kind of ends up that way.
You have your guy in the other class that's like, oh, I can't think of another color today.
Mrs. Fink!
Yeah, you're not a big fan of that guy.
Ooh, I don't like that guy. But, it's much like with Cousin Cora, he's only around for like a couple of episodes, and he's just for a couple seconds. But yeah,
we're with Rubella. If we could be so lucky,
I don't mind Rubella as much as you do, but I absolutely see where you're coming from. Notice here that Brain's voice actor has his voice has dropped a little bit from the last season,
or it could be a different person.
It's the same.
Oh, it's the same guy, because I do know in the early seasons multiple different people play the Brain.
So. Well, actually, a lot of the voice changes don't start in earnest for like a few seasons, so we're still in the same one, and you can tell, like, listening to it, comparing the two, that it's just the same voice a little deeper. So that's a bit of a change into season 2. New year, new production schedule. So he even says, Arthur looks quite distinguished with a beard. And Prunella's wondering why they're acting so strangely, and Brain thinks it's psychological stress brought on by too much homework. That happens to me sometimes. And then, but no, Rubella gets a premonition.
Yeah.
And she realizes that Arthur is under some kind of hypnotic spell.
Well, it's still unclear. I think we talked about this during Rubella's debut. It's unclear whether Rubella actually believes the things she's saying, or she's just funning around for the kids.
It's hard to say, because she goes really far with this whole jape, and like she really goes the extra mile. So if she's trying to fool them, I mean, this is her whole life.
Yeah.
Her whole life is a lie.
She's really embraced the prestige.
Yeah. So Rubella says that Arthur's been placed under a hypnotic spell, turning him into a zombie. Brain immediately tries to refute this to his credit, and doesn't go along with it until the very end. They realize they have to stop him before they all become zombie slaves. Your friend Arthur is under a terrible spell. That kind of... reminds me a little bit of Dr. Orpheus from the Venture Brothers. You ever watch the Venture Brothers?
I've never watched the Venture Brothers. I've heard great things.
It's so good, man.
It's that classic, that classic Vincent Price, sort of Boris Karloff, like.
Or if you ever saw, I'm really sorry to interrupt you, because you're right. The classic showman magician reminds me. I'm sorry, it just came to my head of from the Spectacular Spider-Man. Their take on Mysterio, which was the same sort of voice of like
Mysterio. Except he was a goober. I love Mysterio, but he was such an idiot.
Behold, Mysterio, master of the arcane arts. You dare call Mysterio a magician?
Oh, man.
It's great. Spectacular Spider-Man and the Venture Brothers. Watch both of those shows, kids. So Buster ends up tagging along to Arthur's place for a nice sit-down dinner with Mr. Rogers, which, hey, I would love it. But Buster is, he's a real Mr. Rogers mark. Like, he's asking about, like, he asks him, like...
We get deep into the Mr. Rogers lore here, which, if you actually weren't familiar with Mr. Rogers before seeing this episode, the context would kind of be lost on you a little bit.
And, he asks him, like, deep stuff, like, does King Friday ever visit you in the trolley? And good old Mr. Rogers, he could just be like, it's fake, kid. But it's just like... Well, no, Buster. King Friday's trolley doesn't really come around to me. I go visit him and
Imagination Land, I believe. Imagination something. I keep wanting to say Imagination Junction, but that's just that dastardly Zaboomafoo creeping back into my mind.
It's Imagination something. And Buster's like, wow. And even DW, I love this. She's just like, oh, brother. Because she's like, even she gets that it's just a TV show, but Buster somehow believes with all the might of a kid who believes in Santa Claus. Prunella, Rubella, and Brain are spying on them from the window, trying to figure out what's what with this whole zombie thing.
They're sort of like the wet bandits or something. These clumsy, like trying to all climb over one another to look at this window. Committing a crime, I must say. This is trespassing. Even though there know Arthur and Buster and all them, it's still trespassing.
Rubella, like, slams her thumb in the door. You kid, I'm gonna get ya. She says, like, Buster has, like, look at that drooling, idiotic face. And then Prunella's just like, Buster kind of always looks like that. Which I thought was kind of funny. Then we go into the living room as the night kind of progresses, and Buster's like, and there was this one time where you did the dance, and I did the dance too. And he's like doing this really weird kind of like almost like modern rap type of dance.
Yeah, I was going to say it's almost like a nay-nay if you were to switch hands mid-nay-nay.
It's really...
if you sped it up, it would look like Buster was hitting the Quan. That's all I'll say about that.
Okay, that's beyond my knowledge, but he's really like... You really have to throw your shoulders and throw your head back and jump around.
Buster's got the stanky leg.
Yeah. Buster really acting his age for an 8-year-old. He desperately wants to impress Mr. Rogers. Like
how could he not be with those dance moves?
He really wants Senpai to notice him.
I like the pairing of Brain and Prunella as the B storyline in this episode.
Okay.
I thought that was really interesting. Like, these are two characters we definitely haven't seen interacted. Brain's actually a really good character to pair with the other characters in the B plot lines because he doesn't really act his age. He brings something so much different to the table. So I always liked, we've seen in episodes, Brain paired off with Binky. That was a really fun dynamic. Brain paired off with Buster is really fun. So I continue to enjoy seeing Brain matched with another character to be the B plot in an episode.
Brain's a really versatile character.
Yeah, for sure.
He works very well as a straight man, but as we see later, like when he goes off the rails, like he can really like go places, and I think that you can use him in a lot of different ways. And this was, I think I agree. That's a good point. It's a combination that we hadn't seen before. So they keep trying to see inside, figure out what's going on. Arthur keeps catching them and like. Closing the curtains and stuff like that. Like Brain knocks on the door at one point and, still figures that Arthur needs help with homework. And Arthur's just like, no, I don't need help with homework. And if I do, Buster's here. Bye. And then Brunel's just like, Buster, help him with homework? Something's really wrong.
Rubella really freaks out. She says, soon we'll all be making fools of ourselves for their stupid zombie entertainment. I believe that's in reference to when Buster's dancing.
Yeah.
I don't know, Rubella kind of playing fast and loose with the zombie rules. I guess the zombies like to watch people dance.
Just trying to make it fit. So as they're sneaking around the Reed house, wouldn't you know it, but Mrs. Tibble is on crime watch.
That's right, neighborhood watch. Mrs. Tibble... Shout out to Mrs. Tibble for keeping our streets safe.
That's right. So she's on the phone with a friend and she's watching the Reed house and then
through binoculars, which is a little bit unethical to have binoculars to look at other people's houses.
Yeah, really.
It's not like she lives at a place where she has a nice look off or a view or something. Those are to peep on people.
Yeah, it's a real Who Watches the Watchmen situation.
Disturbia. Holler at me.
And so she calls 911 as she thinks people are trying to break into the Reed house. And then as we cut back, it's DW's bedtime, and of course she gets a bedtime song from Mr. Rogers, which must be awesome. And it's like DW, paying attention in bed, and then Buster's on the edge of the bed, and he's got this like dreamy look on his face, like, oh, Mr. Rod. Like, he's just completely enamored with him.
He's hanging on to every word.
Yes. And Arthur basically kicks him out, just like, you can go home now, Buster. But then they hear the sirens, and, well, the jig is up.
Well, this is quite the climax. Of all the Arthur episodes we've watched so far, this was the one I've remembered the most.
Okay.
Like, I saw all the beats coming. I remembered all the images. And I was excited because I remember, oh, yeah, the cops show up at the end of this one, which is kind of a crazy direction for this episode to go.
Yeah, so the cops show up, but it's all cleared up, and it's actually put on the evening news of how Mr. Rogers came to visit, and they cite that he is an old friend of the family. So Arthur's feeling pretty bad about himself, even though he had nothing to do with this whole police scare. But, you know, now that everybody's going to know that Mr. Rogers is in place, he's kind of on the swing set. This is where he gets an opportunity to have a heart-to-heart with Mr. Rogers. And he admits the fact that, actually, Mr. Rogers helps him kind of find the words of just, he didn't want people to know he was there because he didn't want to feel like, he didn't want people to think he was a little kid anymore. And it kind of says, like, no offense. And he's afraid that his friends will make fun of him. And I thought this was very interesting, especially in contrast to the second story in this episode. Mr. Rogers says, real friends don't make fun of real friends. And your friends seem like real friends.
It's funny you picked up on that. I actually totally forgot that by the time I was watching the second episode. But it makes the pairing somewhat ironic in retrospect.
Or maybe completely intentional. Mr. Rogers comforts him and says that, if they're your real friends, they're not going to make fun of you. And in fact, as Arthur goes to school the next day, he's hoping everybody kind of didn't watch the news, but of course Muffy recorded it on her VHS tape.
That's right, Muffy's trading tapes.
And but they're super excited once they kind of realize that Mr. Rogers is kind of like a real person. They immediately change their tune. Like,
did you ever have someone you knew be on the news and you guys had to physically tape it pre-DVR?
Yeah,
for sure. Right, that's like a pretty common thing back then.
We did that once for like my dad when he was on the news. I'm pretty sure. Like, yeah, exactly. We used to do that every once in a while because that was crazy. It's like, oh, it's like my friend's gonna be on the news. That's crazy.
And then you accidentally tape over the X-Files and you're like, oh no,
I didn't watch it yet.
How is Mulder and Scully gonna get out of this one?
So yeah, they immediately kind of start geeking out over Mr. Rogers, but then Binky's still sticking to his "It's a beautiful day in the neighborhood." But
you see this from a country mile away. You look up into the mountains of Everest and it's like, oh, here comes this gag, but it still works.
It's like watching the horizon in Saskatchewan. You see it from a mile away.
Exactly.
And Mr. Rogers comes up behind Binky and then he just goes and the rapper's got a real stinky look on his face. But Mr. Rogers just like, Arthur's told me a lot about you. Like, he did? Can I have your autograph? And just immediately, it all crumbles. Binky crumbles under the pressure. And then Mr. Rogers, kind of wraps up his talk to the kids. And Binky asks, did you really stay at Arthur's house? And he says, I think Arthur can answer that one. To which he begins to fiddle with his glasses, then hands down, yes, Binky, he did. And Binky's like, can I have your autograph too? And
I would have liked to have heard what lie Arthur was... What was the lie that was so ridiculous that he had to give it up?
If he doubled down?
Yeah.
I don't know.
What could he have possibly said?
Mr.
Rogers was the one trying to break into my house.
his car broke down, and he slept outside, and I never got to meet him. I was away. I was at my grandmother's house. I don't know who this is. I know who this is. I plead the fifth. And yeah, the episode ends that way. Very, very nice end to it. And now a word from us kids. And Mr. Rogers.
This was probably the most I've been into a word from us kids in a very long time.
This was cool.
It fit great with the theme of the episode, but I also, you know me, I think in an earlier episode we watched the stream of it, had a little bit of the after show, like behind the scenes segment. And I love this stuff, especially seeing it now with the value of hindsight. Animation's done very differently. This was pre-Flash. This was pre-Maya.
Yeah.
So it's always cool to see how they used to animate things way back in the day.
So it's kids trying to figure out how they turned Mr. Rogers into a cartoon with a few asides from Mr. Rogers, kind of giving a very like basic and vague explanation of how the cartoon process works.
This is also good if the kids weren't familiar. If you were watching this and you actually weren't familiar with Mr. Rogers, this gives you the context you might have missed.
Yeah, exactly. I remember watching this as a kid and like not being able to understand like I mean, there's still some finer details about the animation process I don't understand, but just like, so they took his voice and put it on paper? Like what's happening? It was still a lot to grasp. I didn't think that, that was actually Mr. Rogers in the cartoon, but I was just like, but how did they get his voice? How did they how is this happening? And I felt the explanation was a little vague, but obviously to go into it would be a lot longer than they have.
You kind of thought it was like a Take on Me situation.
I would have I would have been able to understand that a bit better.
You thought it was like Cool World.
Let's go with Take on Me. Take on Me is
There's one great line in this. At some point, and I get that he has to say this because, it's magic and he's telling kids to believe in themselves and they're making pictures for a project. But at some point, Mr. Rogers goes, anyone can make animation. And then his point is almost immediately refuted because they show this crazy animation of like the kids' class and they're like their heads are on all these creatures' bodies, and it's like 2 frames.
Yeah.
Animation would be a very liberal use of the word.
Yeah, it's like a PowerPoint presentation.
Yeah, so maybe not anyone.
Yeah, there's a kid's head on a dinosaur. There's a couple ways that they say like their theories on how Mr. Rogers was turned into a cartoon, like submerging him in a huge bath and he comes out on the other side as a cartoon.
Some kid might have watched Who Framed Roger Rabbit before they were allowed to.
Maybe. Or like putting him in a box and he comes out as a cartoon. Actually, funnily enough, Who Framed Roger Rabbit, I remember a friend of mine had a book on tape version of that. So like one of those things where it's like they have a little kid's book and then like somebody reads it out. I had a bunch of those when I was a kid. And yeah, like Who Framed Roger Rabbit, not exactly the movie that you'd think would want to appeal to kids.
Hey, it was a different time. There was a RoboCop cartoon.
That's what I was going to say.
You were going to talk about the RoboCop cartoon?
I was going to talk about the fact that RoboCop had toys.
Yeah, well, and also like a Saturday morning cartoon.
And a cartoon and a Canadian TV series that was much more censored, let's say, than the original hardcore RoboCop movies. And just one more note as we leave Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood here. Every time he was on screen, it was impossible for me not to smile. Like just listening to him explain stuff. He was so pleasant.
And now back to Roger.
All right, so now we're leaving Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, going into the next episode. Draw with an exclamation mark.
So far, my favorite episode title yet. No Arthur's draw. No Arthur does a draw. Just draw exclamation point. It sounds like it's like a popular app game for the iPhone or something. Like, you want to play draw?
So the cold open of this is Arthur talking about how Francine's his friend, like one of his best friends, but she can be, I forget what his wording is, maybe a little much sometimes. It's just like, Francine could be a real jerk.
I wrote down, my first note is, Will's not going to like Francine's characterization in this episode.
No.
Call me Nostradamus because I'm expecting that to come true.
Well, okay, let's get into it. So it's just opportunities of Francine just kind of being... thankfully we try and keep the language pretty clean here, but just really being a jerk. Like
she's acting a fool, you could say.
Sure. He says some people can be sore losers. Francine can be a sore winner. Just like her slamming a basketball down, Arthur being like, "But you just won." She's like, "I should have won by more." And like immediately, I'm just like, I don't like people like you.
No, Francine's got that Draymond Green mentality. You can always put more points up on the board.
And then just getting into this utterly asinine argument with the brain. And of course, those are the two that Francine and the brain are both kind of the same type of personality because just kind of manifested differently. Francine's more of an athlete and brain is more of a brain. But they are both the type of personalities that really can't admit when they're wrong.
You know what? I never realized that, but they are kind of ideological opposites. Like, Francine has a more Hobbesian view of the world, whereas Brain would fall in more of the John Locke camp.
I mean, if you want to get really deep into it, I just think that they're both a little big. They both kind of got big heads.
Francine's like, no, I think mankind is inherently evil.
I feel like that would be more the brain. I feel like he's more, he would have the greater swing over to perhaps a Nietzschean ideology when he's older. Which, I can't imagine the brain when he's older, probably insufferable. Just basically going back and forth of just like, yes, I can, no, you can't. Yes, I can, no, you can't. And just like, they will continue to do this for as long as you allow them to. So the framing device of the episode is the Teachers Charity Carnival. For what charity, they never say, but it is an annual festival where the teachers put on acts and do different fun stuff for the kids. Mr. Haney's going to be doing magic. Mr. Ratburn's going to be doing a puppet show, etc., etc. And when they're in the lunchroom, this is where we get Fern, because of course she is a big part of the episode. So we have to kind of put her with, Arthur, Buster, Francine.
This episode actually, I find, is a much better introduction for her and what her character is about than the poetry episode. Fern is more of a plot device in that episode. She's like, everybody's got to make poetry. We don't really get to know much about her, besides that she's kind of shy and she likes literature. This episode, there's a lot more of Fern taking direct action.
Okay. I don't know. I feel like I would kind of argue that. I feel like they both have about the same amount of characterization, which isn't really much. But she's more of a device in the first episode. She is the framing device almost.
Yeah, in this episode, she's to rephrase it, I guess she's more of a character in the story. Whereas in that first episode, she was sort of just the inciting incident. Everybody's got to make a poem.
So Miss Francine says, I hope Mr. Ratburn doesn't do his puppet shows. Actually makes a pretty impressive sandwich puppet herself. Puts the olives for eyes. Just like, if you don't laugh, I'll give you extra homework. And, they got the tomato for the tongue. Like,
Continues
it works out
to be
well.
my favorite thing. Voice actors, voice acting. Voice actors playing a character, playing a different character will never not impress me.
It's something you don't think about until you say that, and then I'm just like, yeah, that must be really tough. But then Fern is very open about the fact that she likes Mr. Ratburn's puppet shows, and then Francine, ice cold here, just like literally is just like, anyone smarter than a rock knows that Mr. Ratburn's puppet shows are boring kid stuff, and then of course that hurts Fern's feelings, and then Fern runs away, and then Francine takes her dessert, just like, guess she didn't want her dessert. Like, there's a couple of moments here when she's talking about Fern, and she's this close to being like, oh, Fern, that special little snowflake. Did I invade her safe space?
I don't think I interpret I don't think I interpreted it the same way. She's being very mean, but I don't think she necessarily has an ideological bent to her bullying.
Well,
I think Fern might just be Fern might be an easy target because she doesn't really stand up to herself until later on in the episode. So that's why she draws the ire of Francine so much. I don't think Francine necessarily is anti whatever Fern stands for.
No, I'm not saying that it's an ideology. I'm just saying that she would be the type of person that she almost is. It's like, that's just kind of a modern vernacular for what she's saying here. Like, later Arthur's like, are you going to apologize to Fern? She's like, apologize for what? And like, you hurt her feelings. And she literally just says, she'll get over it. And that's kind of the underlying thing. I know that kind of talk has been adopted by a few different groups. All I'm saying is that
I say you're saying
in the modern context, that's how people, I find, are very dismissive of people with
She's saying you mad bro. Is what you're
more sensitive type of attitudes, because Fern is a very sensitive kid, and then That's why I say like she's this close to being like, oh, sorry if I triggered her.
Oh my goodness.
And just like, ugh, like again, talking about people that I don't like, or
Yeah.
you're talking about that. But Fern decides to get back at Francine. She gets some resolve here. We cut to later after school where everybody's gathered around laughing at something. Francine, interestingly here, she's like got a basketball and she's just kind of walking by them and she's just like, hey, get out of my way, Buster. I'm like, what? Why? Like this is where it's like, okay, that's a little like. Now you're kind of trying to make her.
Francine's in this episode to play a role. Francine needs to be this way to pay off the end.
Yeah.
They're setting up the story, but you're right. It is. I found it almost comical the way she pushed her, because Buster. I really like it when they kind of make Buster like an ancillary character that's just kind of like comic relief, where it's like, oh, people are gonna mess with Buster in this episode. So seeing Buster get pushed away, I was just like, oh, that's kind of funny.
Well, yeah, and you know what? You're right. It's not so much that. I would say I'm not a fan of Francine's characterization, not her as a character, because her as a character is actually very, can be very deep and interesting. It's just that sometimes she needs to fill a role, and it's just like, I wish this wasn't Francine.
And what they've done with Binky, you'd think they'd actually put Binky in this role,
Sure.
But they've already kind of wrote themselves into a corner with that, because we all know that's not who Binky is.
Yeah, exactly. And when it happens to Francine, it's just like, oh, but why are they friends with her?
That's true. It kind of still comes off as ingenuine. Well, that's not the word, but
disingenuous.
Disingenuous. It's almost like they need a character that they could just have be a bad person.
Kind of a straw man.
Yeah, but because Arthur is so, I would say, well written, everybody's kind of complicated. No one's necessarily just bad. So you run into these issues where we need someone to fill this role, and I guess it's going to be Francine this time.
So they're laughing because I think it was Fern made a comic that is called Furious Frank the Cow.
Okay,
And-
so full stop.
Yo.
Did Fern invent memes?
Go on.
Is this the first? It's just a meme. She drew a picture to make fun of somebody, and it's got text at the bottom, and then everybody else starts making pictures. That's a meme without the internet.
Yeah, it's kind of like it's. I guess it's closer to more of like those rage comics, but that was a meme.
Macro text, man. It's just like we all have this subject we're all gonna riff on. It's Pepe. It's the picture of all the cross section of the guy's neurons, and it keeps getting more and more.
Yeah.
I think Fern invented memes.
Interesting theory.
And to a certain extent, trolling. She does her fair share of trolling in this episode as well.
Pre-internet trolling. Yeah, we'll get into a bit later, but yeah, that's a good point. So yeah, you can hear Francine kind of doing the voiceover, and I love this line here. It's just like, get out of my way. I'm better than everyone. I'm even better than people who are better than me. I'm like, all right, really hitting the nail on the head there. And then, she's like, is this supposed to be of me? And Fern's just like, how could it be? Frank is a boy. And that's kind of her way of being like, no, not at all.
It's satire.
And yeah, really that veneer of satire. And Muffy's just like, how could it be you? Frank is mean and pushy and loud. And Francine's like, stop helping me, Muffy.
I love that. I love that it's so consistent with Muffy and Francine's relationship. Like, she's done that exact thing in a previous episode.
Yeah, exactly. So Francine walks away just like, that's about as funny as biting into an apple and finding half a worm.
Oh, very visceral.
Yeah. Well, she's mad. Then the subplot of this episode is, for some reason, Miss Tingley, as she is trying to arrange everybody's individual acts for the Teachers Charity Carnival. So she goes into the staff room. We get a look at a couple people's. Mr. Ratburn has like a new dragon puppet that he's going to do for a play about Sinbad.
Not the comedian.
No, it's Sinbad the sailor. And then we get Mrs. Sweetwater. She's nice. And she is going to be having a sing-along and giving a prize to the best singer-alonger. And then... Is
this the debut of the I Like Fudge song, or have we heard it before?
We've heard it before.
We have heard it before. I love it, though.
Miss Ratburn was singing it in her episode.
Isn't that weird? So because at first, as a kid, I remember the I Like Fudge song vividly because it sort of becomes a running inside joke. It's very Arrested Development in the way it keeps coming back. But as a kid, I remembered it was always Mrs. Sweetwater. It's one of those Berenstein things. I guess Mrs. Rapper was the first one to pen the I Like Fudge song, and then Mrs. Sweetwater picked it up or something.
Well, I think it's probably. I wouldn't be surprised if this was a song that kids did that was just a kid's song out of the time.
Oh, really? I've only ever known
surprised.
it from Arthur. My mom used to reference it all the time. She's like, remember that annoying I Like Fudge song?
But then Mrs. Sweetwater's just like, you don't look very happy, and then just like won't leave Miss Tingley alone. And I'm not saying worst character, but I don't think I like Mrs. Sweetwater very much.
Oh, Will. You're the Joe Budden to Mrs. Sweetwater's Lil Yachty. You want her to not be happy anymore.
I'm not saying no. I'm just saying respect people's personal space, my man. Just because like throughout the episode, she's just popping up in all these places, trying to get her to be happy. This is some totalitarian garbage. Let her be unhappy if she wants to be unhappy. And like no, and she's also like scarily happy, like all the time. So she kind of
Joe Budden, man, topical.
whatever. Miss Tingley goes to see Mrs. McGrady. What her act is going to be? She's going to be a fortune teller. Mrs. McGrady. They toned down the Boston in her accent. She doesn't sound, because last season it was just like, I'm sorry, Arthur, and this time it's she's more of just her own voice.
She just kind of sounds old.
Yeah,
Vague old lady
older
voice.
And she eventually ends up in Mr. Haney's office, and he's going to be doing a magic act and offers to saw her in half. Mr. Haney.
For all you Canadians out there, it's reminiscent of Mom, Aiden cut me in half again.
My thing's sound effects. Here's a T-Rex.
If you're American, look up, what's your thing public service announcement
What's
to
your
get what we're talking about.
What's your thing? Bugs.
Boom, 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 boom. How many times have we probably seen that we're able to recite it word for
Everybody's
word?
got a thing. Everybody's good at something. What's your thing? Yeah. Mr. Haney has a magician getup that I wanted to highlight here. It's a top hat with a cape. He's got a teal sweater on and a red bow tie. He looked to me a lot like Harry from Mad Men.
He's dressed a lot like there's an episode of My Brother and Me where they all have to get a job. That's like their challenge. And so Griffin McElroy, the costume they buy from everybody else gets suits and like formal wear. They get him like a top hat and like a coat with tails. And I think Justin McElroy goes, "You look like if hepatitis C was a person."
Okay, so more live action Arthur casting. You're gonna have to help me out with this one. Which of the McElroy brothers doesn't have glasses? Which one is that?
That's Justin.
Justin. Okay, I think Justin McElroy would be a great Mr. Haney.
Oh, you're right. He would be a good Mr. Haney.
Either him or the guy who plays Harry from Mad Men. I think either of them would be very good because Harry from Mad Men has the same type of glasses. He kind of has the same kind of 60s fat guy aesthetic. So, yeah.
It's an aesthetic that we all strive for.
But also
60s fat guy.
But also I would love to hear like Justin McElroy's voice coming out of Mr. Haney, just like, "Yo, Arthur, what's going on, my dude?"
Arthur, are you excited for Trolls 2? I need a cheese pizza. Yeah, for sure.
Arthur, I know you were just doing that as like a goof, but I mean, come on, man. We get even more cartoons. This is just the beginning of the cartoons and comics. Buster comes up with the first ripoff of Fern's style. It's called The Big Clumsy Moose with Big Feet Named Franny. And the joke is her feet are named Franny? And then everybody's going to be doing their own comic of Francine.
I'm telling you, it's memes. Everybody's trying to get in on that action.
Just a quick production note here. It's just like everybody eventually does their comic of just like, I'm going to do one too. Like, I can do one better than you guys. And then it cuts to Francine just kind of like just silently reading and kind of stewing in it a little bit. Oddly enough, it's a still shot from My Dad the Garbage Man.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah, it's just the exact same shot. Like in the beginning of that episode, it goes to from Francine, pans over to Arthur, except they just took a still of her like right there. And,
Good
like,
memory. That's some Michael Bay up in that business.
some interesting, I guess, cost-cutting move. So some more of the comics that people make are really just one panels at this point, like Franny Foghorn, Frantic Frog, and Fran the Stinky Sneaker.
Which is, I forget who says it, but is immediately remarked upon. That's funny.
Yeah, Sue Ellen says that. And then Arthur, to his credit, kind of sees that it's starting to bother Francine. And again, Fern, just as ice cold as Francine, just she'll get over it. Like in a real more quiet, cold kind of way than Francine was more just like in your face kind of insulting.
An eye for an eye makes the whole world blind, Will.
I was thinking the same thing. But then we get, and Arthur tries to check on Francine, and she kind of rebuffs him, saying, very angrily that she's fine. Doing a real I'm not mad kind of thing. And then Buster comes up with a new comic. His first one was real bad, but this one is like the magnum opus of the Francine memes out there.
This comic, two things. One, it's very Captain Underpants.
Yeah.
It especially reminds me of the comics the boys made in Captain Underpants.
Yes.
And two, it's got a morbid ending. It's like the 1980s remake of The Blob. The ending of this is crazy when you think about it.
Or it's like the 80s horror movie The Stuff.
Oh, The Stuff!
So Buster's is called The Giant Slime That Came to School, and it actually has a narrative.
It also rhymes, doesn't it? A little bit. Like, he's kind of got a sing-songy cadence when he's telling the story.
Not really.
Well, not necessarily rhyming, but, like, in the way he says it, it's not his normal, like, delivery. Like, he's not just giving to his slave.
Yeah, there's a rhythm to it, but Arthur is clearly kind of putting on a reading voice. It starts out with all the kids were at school learning complicated math. By the way, in case you're OCD like I am, the problem that Mr. Ratburn tries to get Arthur and Buster to do, 3,630,279,148 divided by 7,681. I did the math. That equals 472,631.1. and then it happened. The big slime came to school, and it's just this giant green mucus-looking glob of slime with Francine's haircut.
I love the detail that it has no features.
Yeah.
Like, it doesn't have any eyes or a mouth. It's just Francine's haircut and then a giant, what was that movie with Robin Williams where he played basketball with the help of the goopy things? John Hughes wrote it.
Flubber,
a giant flubber with Francine's haircut.
Yeah, essentially. It has a mouth sometimes when it wants to, but it is generally featureless. So there's a couple great lines in here that were just clearly, meant to be, really overdramatic, like Mr. Ratburn, do the math or be gone, large slime. And I thought that was really funny. And the big slime, when it eats something, it makes a specific noise that Arthur interprets as so like a big old slurping noise. And so it eats Mr. Ratburn. The kids are happy, but then it's not.
Careful what you wish for.
It's not all good. And the slime's punishment is oddly specific. It makes the kids play only games it was good at, like basketball. And it has a mouth here where it spits the basketball into the hoop.
I'd be hard-pressed to think of a game the slime would not be good at.
Right.
100-meter dash, maybe. Maybe the biathlon.
Maybe, but then it could just eat the competition, I suppose.
Touche.
Then we get Bionic Bunny, who says, "Slime, go away!" Like, great job, Bionic Bunny. Like, really great start to this. And then him too. And then it's like Bionic Bunny and Mr. Ratburn in the stomach playing Go Fish. One day late at night, Buster, who's only called the boy, and he is alone in the cafeteria and then starts eating the slime. It doesn't realize that it's slime because it's flavored like lime. And we get Buster with these awful, horrid eating noises. like trying to be like halfway between like a pig and a Star Wars character.
I mean, that's the noises you would make if you were to eat a blob of Jell-O the size of your head and shove it in your mouth all at once.
Right.
I'm sure it would not be pleasant.
And Buster and his appetite end up being the hero of the story as he eats the whole slime. And Bionic Bunny says, "Thank goodness you eat like a pig." It's like interesting way of Buster to kind of characterize himself as the hero of the story.
Well, he editorializes after he's finished. After Arthur is finished reading it, Buster makes sure to let us know. I would eat the slime too if it was lime slime.
Then the teacher's charity carnival is about to begin. Everybody kind of rushes out. Mrs. McGrady notices that she's like, "Boy, Francine, you left your comics everywhere," but then notices that Francine isn't exactly happy about them. And that kind of leads into the climax of the story. The teacher's charity carnival looks pretty fun. I love the art teacher making the custom cotton candy of your face. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, all the production value at this like spring fair style charity carnival is through the roof. People have custom tents. There's all kinds of costumes. Mrs. McGrady's tent has like special effects for no reason whatsoever.
Yeah, they really put the effort into this. So then we get into what ends up being the crux of the episode, and really, I think this is great. So Mrs. McGrady comes to Fern with a plan to make Francine look really silly. Gathers everybody together that's been kind of making fun of her and gets them to hide behind a curtain, and she's got like this box up there, and when she says green gloop, they're going to pull the rope. And
not slime, green gloop.
That's right. And she's got like a vat of her own green gloop that she's going to like pour on Francine and embarrass her even further, or at least that's what she thinks. So she brings Francine into her tent and does like a sort of fortune-telling routine, and kind of takes from some of the comics that she saw, like, I see a cow and a foghorn. And eventually, as they begin to talk about it, Francine breaks down. Which is interesting, like how Mrs. McGrady is once again the figure that kids can confide to. Francine literally in tears as, I wish they would stop making fun of me. I know I shouldn't have made fun of Fern, but this is really making me feel bad. And the kids behind the curtain are just like, I can't believe it. Francine has feelings. And it's what everybody
Well, yeah,
needed to
Binky
hear.
says that I can't believe it. Francine has feelings, which kind of lightens the mood a little bit, but it does play into like the realization, okay, we probably shouldn't do this.
And, Francine just being like, I just wish they would stop. And so she feels a little better after talking with Mrs. McGrady. And everybody comes out from behind the curtain, and Buster kind of with the telling line here, it was so much fun making fun of her, we didn't think about how it made her feel. So Mrs. McGrady has kind of exposed the vicious cycle of bullying to them, and like at some point, if you want it to stop, it has to stop with a willing act of basically mercy from one of them. And she actually like gives them the agency to cease fire themselves. And we find out after they go away that there was never any green gloop in the box. It was all just like balloons and streamers and confetti and stuff.
Still, a ballsy move on her part. That could have broke bad if you had a group of less empathetic kids. Like, for instance, if you had Rattles at the helms of the green gloop, he'd be pulling that all day. And even though it'd just be balloons, it would be a weird scene to have a crying Francine and then balloons fall from the ceiling.
Yeah, for sure. Mrs. McGrady wouldn't bring no green gloop on Francine. She's a very upstanding kind of guy. But she put faith in her kids there, and it really paid off. And got them to kind of learn their own lesson a little bit, which is the best way to do it. And I thought that this was a very interesting, so we talked earlier about how Fern may have invented memes and how this is all kind of comparable to maybe today's internet culture. And I found it so interesting that this was kind of intended for kids back in, this would have been maybe 97, 98. But you can totally apply this, I feel, to internet culture today. It's kind of shockingly relevant of how, you have, and I'll just use a blanket example, but let's say on, Twitter, somebody says something that is very mean or hurtful, and then the backlash to them can be almost just as mean and hurtful, if not more.
For sure. I think there's there's not a lot of room in the middle. There's a lot of how do I say this?
It's a tough kind of situation to put into words. I just want to stay on that for a little bit, just because And I wrote down Buster's line again. I'll just repeat it here. It was so much fun making fun of her. We didn't think about how it made her feel. And I feel like sometimes, even though there are definitely people out there who make fools of themselves on social media, or are like especially cantankerous or mean, or just plain wrong, sometimes I feel like the hammer can swing too far going in the other direction, because then you get the stories of like, people fired from their jobs because of something they said, or people who get their computers doxxed, or, get like hate mail or that sort of stuff because of something that they said that was bad, yes, but in the grand scheme of things, maybe should have been more chastised and forgotten rather than, continued to drag on. Which is kind of what happened here, is that Francine was mean to Fern, and that was bad, and that shouldn't have happened, and Francine should have been chastised for it and made to feel how Fern feels, made to understand how she feels, but this was kind of the wrong way to do it. You swung it back, and now Francine feels bad too. And in the real world, this happens, and it just becomes this horrible feedback loop of people trying to make other people feel bad because they made them feel bad.
It's an example of a lack of empathy. When you have empathy for someone else's situation and you say, well, I didn't like that thing that person said, or I think that thing that person said was hurtful, it's very hard, but sometimes necessary to be able to look at their entire situation as a whole and say, okay, instead of just immediately turning on this and being like, oh, I think you should go pound sand, or that's very tame, but because I don't want to say anything actually rude. Right. Instead of doing that, you could take a moment to think and go, okay, so what about this person's situation would lead them to this conclusion, and why don't I like what they say? There's more constructive ways to go about it rather than just trying to be as hurtful back as possible.
And this has the added thing of like, this is all in person, so they are all in the same school. They're seeing each other face to face, and that kind of interaction does add quite a bit of room for nuance, for understanding. In today's social media, it's all basically anonymous. You see a picture of the person that may not even be their face, and you can totally make whatever assumptions you want to because you don't really know them in real life.
We're all behind Mrs. McGrady's curtain every day with our hands on that rope. Will we pull it? Well, that's up to you to decide in your day-to-day life.
That's right. Very good. And the conclusion of this episode, I thought, was a little rushed, because we get the kids kind of going after Francine to kind of try and make up to her, and then we see them like playing a dart game, and Fern says like, wow, way to go, Francine, and then we just kind of shuffle away from that. We get like one more gag with Miss Tingley being chased by Mrs. Sweetwater and Mr. Haney, and then that's about it. I'm just like, okay, well, I feel like we could have followed up on that a little bit, maybe just had Fern and Francine kind of talking to each other, but
we had to make room for all those hilarious
for all those goofs.
For all those goofs. Stinky Sneaker. That's funny. Now that's comedy.
Okay, so let's take a look back at these two episodes. Arthur meets Mr. Rogers. What did you think, Lucas?
It's hard for me to be unbiased because, again, this is such a seminal classic Arthur episode. When I think of Arthur episodes, this is one of the first ones that come to mind, so it's hard to separate myself from that nostalgia. That being said, it's super effective at everything it does.
It's super effective.
Mr. Rogers, they use him in the best possible way. Like, a lot of times, I know we're going to get a lot of celebrity cameos in the future to varying degrees of success, but I think that Mr. Rogers' character fits perfectly in the Arthur universe, and he plays his role. I like that he's not really the center of the story even. It's more about Arthur, and Arthur once again coming to terms of not caring what other people think and being able to trust his friends to understand his situation. And so I think it succeeds at all of that. So, and also DW's hilarious in this episode. It's yet again another solid episode, and I think it earns its classic Arthur episode status, at least in my mind.
Yeah, I'd agree with your summation. It is kind of one of those ones where it is the most notable, since it is one of Arthur's first big guest stars. No shade here to Jack Perletsky, but Mr. Rogers, and they were contemporaries on the same network, so it kind of made sense for him to be there. And I think he sets a great precedent for what a guest can be. It's him filling his role as Mr. Rogers, but I also think it's a very interesting time capsule. I'm thinking about the kids, or the young people, I should say, who didn't grow up with Mr. Rogers, like maybe you or me did, and I imagine maybe they don't have as much connection to him, but I think in one episode you kind of understand what he's about. He almost seems a bit too good to be true, I imagine, if you're not familiar with Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. But I think the only thing that I'm not crazy about is just kind of the framing thing of, or I should say the B plot that intersects with the A plot of, Brain, Prunella, and Rubella, just to kind of add a bit of conflict and to eventually have it come out. But, it's got to happen some way. And I mean, I guess they tried to be a little creative. Again, give us different character combinations. So
Yeah.
I don't hate it or anything. It's just not really, I don't really have any strong feelings about it.
I like their dynamic, but because they were so pressed for time, it doesn't really go anywhere.
Yeah.
Still, I do like seeing Brain matched with odd characters.
And and it was great seeing Mr. Rogers again, a real, not somebody I think of all the time, like maybe I think of Arthur, but it's nice to be reminded. And Draw, as I said earlier, it's an interesting pairing, these two episodes, because as I kind of said in the Mr. Rogers episode, real friends don't make fun of real friends. And I thought that was an interesting byline to consider into the second episode. It's another ensemble episode, and I kind of already made my feelings clear of I don't like when Francine is kind of used as a story device, and I felt that Fern kind of was too. She did get a little bit more characterization, but in the end, it was really to push forth the message rather than develop the characters themselves, the anti-bullying message. However, the message itself is a good one to push. If you have to use these characters to make an anti-bullying message, I think that this is a fine way to do it. And as I said, it holds up surprisingly well when you compare it to the culture that we live in today, which I didn't expect at all. I was watching this episode and then just thinking of wow, I've seen these situations play out this year. Just on Twitter, on Facebook, on social media, just through the 24-hour news cycle of just, horrible things said and then horrible retribution taken. And it's I wish we could learn a lesson from this episode. I think this could speak to adults even of you need empathy and, you need to realize that sometimes the change needs to start with you, even if you are very close to the situation.
I think that's the most effective aspect of this episode is that it could have been easily just Francine's the villain and Fern is the victim. But I think that's the reason they try to vilify Francine so early on. She's so over the top, I'm the worst, I'm Francine. And the reason for that is they turn it completely on its head. And it's Fern's out to get Francine with all these character assassinations. And then we see Francine in tears, which is not something we often see. So they kind of make them both the villain in a way. And that's how these situations usually go. So I thought that was a level of depth and complexity that I wasn't expecting.
Because you don't see that in kids media a lot. Usually the bully in, your run-of-the-mill TV show, your run-of-the-mill cartoon show, I should say, is very one note. And like you said, they both kind of are the bullies, which is crazy to think about for a kids show, but is absolutely true. And I'll be honest with you, I was bullied myself when I was in elementary school, and then that led to me being a bully in junior high. It is this really bad feedback loop, and it's not something I'm proud of. I'm not saying that to puff myself up in any way, but it's kind of to illustrate this absolutely does happen. The people who are disenfranchised, who lose power because of bullying, then look to get that power back by any means necessary and then turn to bullying themselves. And it's a horrible loop that needs to be broken.
That being said, I thought some of the Francine gags were pretty funny.
Sure.
I like that Sneaky Sneaker kept coming back. I liked all the stuff with the adults, as a really, really small B plot, the whole organizing the carnival stuff. All that stuff worked for me. That might just be nostalgia because I remember my mom being so into it back in the day. But all that stuff, Mr. Haney sawing the board in half.
Yeah.
And then it's the board actually sawed in half. Maybe don't get into that. The I Like Fudge song, all that stuff's funny as well. So it's a good mix of a serious message and some good fun bits.
Yeah, they did well to keep it light, and I think that was very important with something that could be a very serious subject. You can do a whole lot of very serious topics on bullying because it's still a problem some 20 years later, and who knows if there's any end in sight. But yeah, you're right. There was some much appreciated levity here and there, and the comics were cool. It reminded me of Sticking Around, which I love. All right, so I'd say a hearty thumbs up for Arthur Meets Mr. Rogers, and Draw. So there you have it. We are well into Season 2 at this point, and thank you very much for listening today, whenever you may be listening. Okay, quickly, Facebook.com/Elwood City Limits. You can interact with us over there. Send us a private message if you like. Twitter, @ECL Podcast. Get up all in our DMs and catch our latest memes. And thank you to our 50-plus followers. ElwoodCityLimits.tumblr.com. Reblogging, all that fun stuff. And, of course, you can email us whatever you'd like at ElwoodCityLimits@gmail.com. We'd love to hear from you. And if you are listening, then thank you very much. But you can also listen SoundCloud.com/Elwood City Limits, or you can go to iTunes and subscribe to us there. And if you please, if you could rate and review us, it helps that algorithm and more people, more like-minded Arthur fans find us. By the way, before I forget, we had a piece of fan content. We had a couple pieces of fan content. I want to say thank you to Daniel Corbin for the couple of screenshots he sent me. But we had our first fan remix. And this blew both of our hair back.
I still can't believe this is real.
Yeah, so in the last episode, we made a goof on Mask Off by Future, kind of did the lyrics to it a little bit. And
if you could call it that, it was a pretty shoddy rendition, but still.
And our listener, Joe Zayas, made us a parody, sort of put us into the beat for Mask Off, and that was great. If you haven't seen it yet, you can go to SoundCloud.com/Elwood City Limits and find it there on our feed, or you can go to one of our social media channels. We made sure to let everybody know about it because we loved it. Thank you very much, Joe Zayas. Okay, Lucas, next week we've got ourselves another episode as we delve into Season 2. This one, these are some more potential classics here. We've got Binky Barnes, Art Expert, and Arthur's Lucky Pencil. So a couple more ensemble episodes, but there's definitely a lot to work with in these ones, and I'm interested to see how we'll find it. All right, thanks a lot for listening to Elwood City Limits. We really appreciate it. Lucas, what do you got?
Anyone can make animation.
Mr. Rogers, ladies and gentlemen.
Happy Cinco de Mayo, everybody. There's a holiday I forgot about.
And as we go out here, I know we normally kind of do the extra, and again, we will see you next week. But I wanted to leave you, since we did kind of a bit of YouTube researching for Mr. Rogers. By the way, I would absolutely recommend that you look up, YouTube search Garden of Your Mind. It's a PBS digital remix of it's like an auto-tune remix of Mr. Rogers, and it's a beautiful little song. But I wanted to leave you with the words of Fred Rogers himself. We kind of want to dedicate this episode to him and all the work that he did in, well, helping to shape us as kids. And these are his words, his speech from winning a Lifetime Achievement Award at the Daytime Emmys 20 years ago in 1997.
Before Ellen ruled the world.
That's right. All right, we will see you next week, and to take you out of here, here is Mr. Rogers.
So many people have helped me to come to this night. Some of you are here, some are far away, some are even in heaven. All of us have special ones who have loved us into being. Would you just take, along with me, 10 seconds to think of the people who have helped you become who you are? Those who have cared about you and wanted what was best for you in life. 10 seconds of silence. I'll watch the time. Whomever you've been thinking about, how pleased they must be to know the difference you feel they've made. You know, they're the kind of people television does well to offer our world. Special thanks to my family and friends, and to my co-workers in public broadcasting, family communications, and this academy for encouraging me, allowing me all these years to be your neighbor. May God be with you. Thank you very much.